Good day. In this day, I'd like to share with you a very simple method to bring your interview answers from good to great. The first step of this method would be to speak a number of your answers out loud. Okay, so pick 3 most commonly asked interview questions and try to answer them out loud. You could record yourself, you could role play with a friend or with an interview coach. The main thing would be to self-assess. Okay, if you're able to self-assess your performance on those 3 answers you give and you're confident that those answers are perfect ones, in my experience, you can confidently say you can go interviewing with any high-performing company. Okay. Now, what happens most of the time is when people speak their answers out loud, they will find some things they wish they'd improve on with those answers. Such as, for example, you weren't able to remember some details or some interesting metrics you wanted to share with them. Maybe you wanted to share a bit more context to make, to make your answers a bit more compelling. Maybe your choice of story wasn't the best one, and so on. Okay, so this would be the most common scenario when people realize where they might have done better with these things. Now, what happens is for some candidates, they are not easily able to self-assess how qualitative their answers are in this, simulated but rather live environment when you speak them out loud. And in this scenario, if you cannot assess your performance on these answers, my advice would be to never go into an interview with a high-performing company, but rather seek help. Okay, because if you're not able to assess your own performance, there is a more serious cause of concern with regards to your interviewing skills, right? Also, another relatively common scenario is that people are skeptical about speaking their answers out loud, even recording themselves, simply because, they realize they're not there. They lack confidence. They think, hey, I'm sure I'm not there yet, right? So this brings me to the second step of this 2-step process, by the way. You must understand that in job interviews, it is rare for candidates to give perfect answers because they prepare the precise questions they got asked during those job interviews. But rather, it's a combination of luck, of opportunity, and stuff like this. So candidates have a tendency to give reactive answers to interview questions in job interviews. Okay, so if you're asked what's your most recent invention, you will think, hey, what's the thing I invented last week? And yes, probably you would find something. Or what's your most recent failure? It's a bit more dangerous as an interview question. You will think, hey, where did I fail as of recently? Right? Now, this is in contrast with the candidates who do not really prepare or do not take as core to prepare as many interview questions as possible, but rather to prepare on behaviors. That is, prepare a story bank. Okay, so basically, what's your most recent invention becomes what's the most interesting story for inventions that you can share with me, or what's your most recent failure, what's the best failure story you prepare for the interview, with the objective of sharing some interesting learnings for that purpose. And I could go on with these types of lists. But long story short, preparing a story bank on behaviors versus preparing answers to commonly interview questions will basically help you to cover even 100% of the types of questions you might get asked in job interviews. And in my experience, this does happen quite a lot, even for candidates to have 100% of the questions they're asked solely based on the behaviors that they prepare. Right? And you can imagine if you prepare answers on stories on behaviors and you're getting asked questions that relate to that specific behavior, that's when you have the best possible content, best possible answers that you prepare for these job interviews. Right? So it's as simple as that, preparing a story bank versus reactively answering interview questions, and this will be the 2-step process. Now, last but not least, the key to understand is that this is not a this is not a 2-step process and that's it. You rehearse your questions and you prepare a story bank and that's it. No, it's a combination. It's a continuous thing you would do. You would prepare a story bank, you would role play, then you role play, you will self-assess, which is critically important to understand even during job interviews, because if you can self-assess and you can also read a little bit between the lines of the interview questions, that's the best possible combination. So when you prepare on behaviors, you role play, you assess, hey, where should I improve? You go back to your story bank and improve it, and this is what blends. This is how you arrive. This is how you bring your answers from good to great. And I can speak from a position of having seen thousands of candidates who've employed this type of process, and I do have many success stories using this approach. Right? Maybe a closing note here. This approach is role independent. Right? So it's preparing for behavioral interviews is the same thing for a software engineer as for a director. Right? It's the same combination of role playing and story bank. Okay, I do this for long enough to understand these things, and if you do not feel, if you feel like, hey, but the examples you preparing for a director level role cannot be the ones of a software engineer, or you cannot take value from exceptional answers for a software engineer, then something is off with your ability to self-assess. Okay, so it's always your ability to self-assess that's critically important with these things, and rehearsing your answers will only improve your ability to self-assess and combine it with your story bank. And this is the two-step process to bring your answers from good to great. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.